on it. Not go grab the ladder, not wait for the apparatus to get him to the 3rd floor, just jump on it. But if he gets there and he's got yellows and reds, what's he got? He's got taxi meters on them. That somebody in the city is taking care of this situation. The guy's either getting dragged through court or whatever, because it's sitting there with a tag that can't be removed. Now, we were teaching a class, and in the class was a state building inspector. And the state building inspector was talking about what can be done to help you guys sort of get this under control when it comes to what, do we need to change the law? Do we need, he goes, it's very simple here in Massachusetts. You can't just go change codes the way you want without affecting the code and having some blowback. He goes, but you can have departmental procedures as a standard. So we came up from that class working with a state official. We said, okay, what can we say? He goes, you got to keep it generic. You can't tell them what to do or how to do it, but you can tell them more or less how you guys would like it done. So let's open it up to this page. I'll read it along. This is a sample because, and here we can send this to you, and this is either in PDF or in Word. You can modify it any way you want, get rid of all the pictures. But what we do is, if we do it for you, we put your website up here, your city website. We put your name and phone number over here as a contact. We don't have any of our information on here. And even if you don't like the National Firescape Association.org, you just click it and you delete it. Okay, get it out of there. But, and down here is the building code. Okay, so let's talk about the building code. So let me tell you, if you're an inspector, so if you have these, you can just send these out. If you wrote a violation, someone says, what do I do? You send them one of these, either electronically or they have a bunch of them printed out on your desk, and you hand it to somebody who just got a violation. Now, let me tell you what the person has to do. And this procedures and guidelines is used nationwide, right? So if for inspections, which is what you're calling for as soon as you write a violation, this is what you want from a structural engineer or others acceptable to you. In layman's terms, the city official is looking for a registered structural engineer or others qualified and acceptable by the fire or the code official to do a critical examination in lieu of a live load test. Criteria submitted or discussed prior to the inspection, meaning, guess who's going to call you before they go inspect this firescape you wrote a violation on? This structural engineer. And issues written verification and certification that all the connections are free of internal rust or rot, as well as all original hardware, which is the square heads or rivets, bolts or rivets, are reinforced, so I can keep beautiful 50, 75-year-old rivets. I can keep them if I back them up with another bolt somewhere nearby, because they are 50 to 75 years old. So if somebody's in love with their 50 to 75-year-old bolts and rivets, keep them, but I need a backup bolt behind it somewhere near it. Or replaced in lieu of a live load test. Well, sometimes for me to drill a hole, it takes me 7 minutes. It takes me 3 minutes to knock out a square head bolt and put a new bolt in there in a perfectly good connection. Not a bad one, perfectly good connection. It takes me 2 minutes with an impact gun or with a cutting disc to get that square bolt or that rivet out. So whatever's cheaper for the client. You think 2 minutes or 7 minutes is cheaper for the client. So all supports, through bolts or cemented into the wall, must be verified in lieu of a live load test. So this engineer now has to verify the connection into the wall, and he can do that. He comes over here, if there's a sheetrock, he can open up a little hole, and from that Home Depot snake that you buy that has a little camera, what's he do through that little half-inch hole? He sticks it in there, and he goes to verify the plate that's inside all your wood structures. Is that verification enough for you? Because the thing takes pictures. Is that verified? That thing inside is good? Or if it's not verifiable, he must verify it from the outside, as it says in here. A firescape confidence test and tag must be submitted to if the firescape passes. So that confidence test we have in here must be given, and the thing must be tagged for you. The report with photos identifying violations for repairs must include repair criteria submitted to the official for repair vendor to use as a guide during and with the engineer's oversight of permitted repairs, if required. You know what everybody hangs and plays on when it comes to repairing firescape? Are they repairing it or painting it? With some small repairs. What do you think everybody in Massachusetts does that's a vendor? That's an ironwork vendor. Are they repairing it and then painting it, or are they painting it with some small repairs? I'm painting it with some small repairs. That way, in case you show up and ask me where my repair permit is, what do I say? I'm painting it. You don't need a painting permit. And then you apologize like crazy, and you say, I'll go pull a permit if you really want one, and you know, that's the because the violation you wrote said what? Scrape it and paint it. So I'm only following the law, sir. 75 years of that. that nobody's been pulling permits. I mean, a handful here and there, but I'll tell you, 90% of the fire escapes are getting repaired without a permit. That's going to change. A fire escape confidence test in tags identifying certified conditions are then submitted. Recommended cycle for live load testing is 20 years after a total refurbishment of a fire escape. If you totally refurbish a fire escape, you want to load test it 5 years from now? The average cycle nationwide is 20 to 25 years on a full refurbish. If I spot repair this fire escape, I got to load test it. If I find the fire escape in great condition, I can load test it now. I am not going to load test it for another 20 to 25 years. Because it's always the opinion of the structural engineer and the building official as to whether or not a load test needs to be done in 5 years, if the thing's been refurbished. The connections into the wall. We talked about, verifying them. Can I just duplicate them? You guys know that it's going to cost me a mason $200 to $500 to blow all the bricks around each bracket. Open it up so I can look at it. Oh yeah, it's bad. Let me change this one, but not that one. Or can we just let sleeping dogs lie on these 50, 75, 100-year-old buildings, and about 5 inches away from a masonry connection, can I do a 3/4 hole and put an 8 to 12-inch epoxy bolt from Hilti, and then mechanically fasten it back to the original connection and repack the original connection. So my original connection now is my secondary connection. What's my primary? The new one. So can I just duplicate it to avoid the verification process, which is $50 for an epoxy, $200 to $500 for damaging all the bricks? Will that fly with some of you? Flies with everybody in the United States that you just duplicate the connection. What would you like to do?
Well, I think if you duplicate the connection, isn't it just as good?
No, that was the question. If I duplicate the connection and I keep the original,
Right.
my thing is sometimes you got to let sleeping dogs lie, because by the time you start touching bricks, things start falling apart around the bricks that becomes a can of worms, whereas 5 inches away I just blow a new epoxy bolt in there. And in some cases you can unify the connections. You put a 3x3 angle underneath all the supports, and every 2 to 3 feet you put an epoxy bolt into the angle, and where the angle touches every support you reconnect it there. So now you've unified the entire wall. Yes, question?
This is just talking generally. I would try to not to second guess the original designer's intent when he placed the fasteners where he did. And my first attempt would be to remove the original fastener from the hole. Many of them are rotten in my experience anyway.
We're going to
Cut
show.
the head off, you pull them right out. There's
Yep.
nothing there, they don't go through. Many of them don't go through.
Yeah, they're 8 to 12 inches
In
deep.
fact, the next one I find that's through bolted at Back Bay will be the first one.
Yeah.
Okay, I do a lot of work at Back Bay over the last 30 years, and I thought those pitches that were going up before were all Back Bay and
Yeah.
along Bay State Road.
Yep. Let me show you a couple more. So,
I would, without trying to second guess the original designer, my first concern would be to try to get the original fastener out. Because you start moving things around, you're starting asking the people.
no, the original stay. The original supports stay. The new connection is what you move, and you use the epoxy bolt or a through bolt if that's possible. So, on this first one, is that clear enough for any structural engineer what you want? Which means that you want to have a one-on-one with this structural engineer, right? Who's going to tell you the results of this findings? Yes.
Just because the document talks about copyright, there's a couple of things that were added, like you said acceptable by the buyer code officials, that should actually say building official.
Right. I use it. This is generic.
Can it be modified?
Oh, yeah. When I send it to you, it's a Word document. You can go in and say, I don't want it to say this, I want it to slightly say this other. I don't even want to use this page. I'm just going to copy some of these words, drop it into your own city documents, and use it that way. So feel free to use that. So that's what the engineers are going to read. Let's talk about what the vendors are going to read, because they're going to have questions also for the building department. And instead of answering it, you can email this to them, or you can have them come by and grab this from off your counter. So here's a repair guy's problem, or that he has to deal with. In layman's terms, the city official is looking for a qualified licensed repair vendor to do all the work on the repair permit, if required. Because some of you guys keep saying, well, we don't always require. So, okay. So normally, anytime you touch a structural anything, you have to pull a permit, but I put in there, if required, with engineer oversight of repair criteria submitted for approval to the building official. So this first guy sent you the report, talked with you, and got together with a strategy of what they're going to do to fix this fire escape. This vendor is not under your oversight. This vendor is under the engineer's oversight, who's the final guy who's going to sign. Because a lot of times these engineers are doing an initial inspection, and they're forgotten for 6 months. And only after the fire escape is painted is this guy called back to sign off on it. He did no oversight in the middle, okay? So we're saying here that this fire escape can be repaired, and if you're going to avoid the load test, you want full-on engineer oversight, keeping an eye on the vendor, and that vendor is using some guideline, which is photographic evidence, a repair document that that the inspector and the engineer have agreed, this is what I want done to that fire escape, come have your vendor pull a permit. So that engineer is there day one when they start doing the job, telling them, this is what I want you to do, this is how I want you to do it. That engineer is going to be there in the middle of the job when the work is halfway through to see how's he doing, and is he doing everything per the book. And then that engineer is there at the end to basically sign off on the job when all the repairs are done before it gets painted. Why does the engineer want to sign off on this job before they start painting?
Because paint hides the multiple.
Paint hides everything. I can hide more things with paint and silicone than you can ever shake a stick at. You got rust? No, you don't. Not after I put silicone over it. So some of these guys will change bolts, will weld this, will weld that. Okay, so we're going to tell you one of the reasons why, silicone and paint should be done after, because right now you've got some examples here of the right way to fix fire escapes and the wrong ways. I got a totally welded, bastardized fire escape here that is currently being done. And I've got bolted fire escapes over there that has connections and rust still in it. I've got another piece of fire escape with bolts and silicone in it. And it's primed, meaning how hard is it for a structural engineer to walk a fire escape and look for brown blotches all over the fire escape? Once he signs off on it, then you can fully paint it. But until then, you need that kind of oversight, and you don't have time to go check the fire escape. That's why the owner has a structural engineer who's going to be giving the guarantee at the end, a certified document, because that's what your code says here. Load test it or certify it. So we're going to go into the interpretation of that. So let's, all connections must be free, though. So this is the repair guys. He's already got some general activities he's got to do. Ready? And this is the repair criteria submitted for approval to the official in lieu of a live load test, meaning this engineer is trying to convince you not to load test this fire escape. So all connections must be free of internal rust or rot, spot primed and sealed. All worn material must be repaired or replaced. All supports into walls must be reinforced, repaired, or certified in the fire escape confidence test in lieu of a live load test. All square head, bolts, rivets, and welded connections must be certified, reinforced, or replaced based on age and conditions. All ladders and cantilevers must be balanced and drop to the ground 2 to 3 feet per second and hit the ground and stay down and must lead to a public way. All roof ladders must be secure. No full painting of any fire escape until the spot painted repairs are inspected and certified under engineer oversight, and or the city official may want to go there and sign off on it before it gets painted. If it's a full replacement, that's a whole new ball game. That's a whole new set of plans, approvals, and stuff like that. So is that general enough for any vendor who wants to work in your city to know what you want? Okay, so again, we try to make this as general as possible. Painting. In layman's terms, the city official is looking for a paint vendor, EPA certified. Is that required nowadays? Fire escapes, anything older than 1978. How many people have some fire escapes older than 1978? All of them are presumed to have lead unless you give evidence that it has no lead or low lead, and that must come from a certified lead inspector. But, this fire escape, it's kind of dark, guys, but has lead. And this is at a elementary school. Maybe that's who's been eating all the paint off this fire escape, is all the little kids at that school. I don't know, but anything with orange usually at the bottom as a base is a lead-based primer. So we're telling these guys, you're going to touch a fire escape, it's got lead on it, unless you got a document from a certified lead inspector that says it's got low lead or no lead. And that's per EPA, so that guy's got to have a renovator's license. And do all the work per the EPA guidelines, which, lay the plastic, wear the white suits, the gloves, the little mask. Because everything is presumed to have lead that is EPA, unless identified as no lead or low lead by the licensed lead inspector. Entire building must be notified with signage. All precautions shall be taken to collect paint chips at grade. No sandblasting without full encapsulation. No power-assisted scraping without fire escape being totally encapsulated under the EPA guidelines, and now you're using oxygen masks and all that other stuff. All major connections shall be sealed from water intrusion before, during, and after painting. All escapes should be spot painted every 3 to 5 years and fully painted every 5 to 10. Canada of Rust-Oleum, you know what it says when you got to repaint the whole entire fire escape again? 7 years. under perfect conditions. We have perfect conditions here in this, in Massachusetts? So, with that, layman's terms. Now, some of these guys do all three. Some guys inspect, repair, and paint it. So they have to follow all three guidelines. Sometimes you get three people. You got an engineer doing the inspection, you got a vendor doing the repairs, and then you bring in some Joe Painter. They all can get the same document. So we can send you through your association, and then they get it off to you, or if we collected your card and you want it, give us a call. We'll make, and it's a pretty simple document to make. It just takes a little time, but we do it every day, is we go to your website and we clip your front page. We take your name and phone number, we just put it up there. We already have the Massachusetts building code, and everything else is generic. Let me show you what the building code says. So we can make it, you can make it. This is what it starts out as. This is what tags look like in Seattle. They want them 19 inches by 11. Ours is 8.5 by 11. But they basically say the same thing. They want a red one for life safety problems. They want a yellow one while it's under repair. And they want a white one if it's certified 7 to 10 feet off the ground, permanently affixed to the fire escape. Good idea? This is what it looks like on a building. That's a tag from Seattle. This is a tag from Massachusetts. They both say the same thing, but within 7 to 10 feet off the ground. Do you know when the next inspection date is? Do you know who did the inspection, what his license number was, who the service was, who the engineer is? And the code is right there on the tag. And it's very clear, fire escape has no deficiencies. This is here in, out by Worcester. This is a detention center for kids 17 and younger. So if your sentence didn't get you, guess what's going to get you? This is in a courtyard, an inside courtyard. 25 to 50 years of growth, unchecked. Takes a quarter inch. Now, this is from a metallurgist, not me telling you. A metallurgist, in a lot of my cases, it takes 25 years to grow a quarter inch of rust in a connection. It takes 50 years to grow ½ inch of rust. How big is this? Right? Ready? Now, you guys only need to, when you walk up to a fire escape, to identify that it has nothing but original hardware. You can do that from the ground. You don't have to get on them anymore. If there's evidence that the fire escape has not been maintained in its lifetime, don't get on it to go show them where the broken tread is, because usually your foot is stuck in it. Here's why you don't want to walk a fire escape up or down. Because when we inspect fire escape, we hammer test. Not as part of a fire escape inspection, but it's a safety inspection for us as to whether or not we can even get on it. So with a 3-pound hammer, we walk up fire escapes slowly, that our treads are falling already, and we do this.
Okay, I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Stay down here, so I don't get hurt.
Why go any further? It was that was a horrific fire escape. Cantilevers, guys. Let me tell you a little bit about cantilevers. They're supposed to be with a release arm. When you release them, the word release means somehow you got to release it. When you release it, it's supposed to drop 2 to 3 feet per second, hit the ground, and stay down. Okay? Because right now, when you walk out, if you have a fire escape in your city, and nobody, it was perfectly balanced, did not even have a release arm on it. It's perfectly balanced. You're supposed to step on the first one. It automatically activates it. And as soon as you get beyond a certain point, it drops to the ground 2 to 3 feet per second, hits the ground, and stays down. Tuned like a Swiss watch. But when it snows, guess what happens to these things? They go down. Guess who gets a call at 3 o'clock in the morning? No, the owner. Hey, there's somebody breaking into the building, you got to come down. So, pigeons land on the nose. Guess what happens? So for 75 years, you know what the answer was when the thing was not perfectly balanced and you had to balance them every 5 years? And the rust box started filling up with rust, because rust grows to 5 times its size and its weight. What starts happening, it starts looking up into the sky. You stop by, walking the streets, and you see a fire escape leaning north, leaning to the let's call it north, and you let it go long enough and it does this, you're going to just walk by and let that alone? Or are you going to write a violation? So you write me a violation, I'm the owner of the building, I make a phone call to an iron worker. You know how much he wants to rebalance and get all that weight out? He wants $2,500. I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I call my best friend Charlie, who's kind of a fix-it kind of guy. He goes, oh, dude, I go down Home Depot, $25. I get a chain, and I grab a chain and I chain it here and I chain it back up to the grating up there. How many people have seen chains everywhere? Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, everywhere. Those are there so that the fire escape looks horizontal. But because of that, what do I have to do? In order to get out, I have to come down the stairs, and I have to go out how many steps in order for me to counteract that extra weight you just threw on the back? Right? I go out 3, 5, 7 steps, and what happens?
Wham.
Does it come down to 2 to 3 feet per second? Comes down at 5 to 10 feet per second. So now it's a violent situation, and I'll show you one. But let's get a scenario going here. A woman and a child coming down a set of stairs. The woman's $150, the child is 50, and the woman comes down and she starts walking out with the child in tow. And the woman goes out 3 steps. Does it go down yet?
No.
She goes out 5 steps plus. Does it start to make a move? It goes down 5 to 10, slams the ground. Is there any screaming and crying going on? 2 possibilities. That woman's going to get ejected, the child's going to get ejected, but they don't. They hold on. It's a nice story. So they go all the way down to the ground, and the woman gets to the last tread, 150 pounds, steps off the thing, and she's got the child behind, and what happens to that child? Catapults. Nobody's there videotaping it for YouTube, so the child gets catapulted, or no, the child holds on. It's a great story. The child is holding on. This child is 12 to 14 feet off the ground. That's where they all are. And what's the mother tell her?
Jump.
Mother says, jump, jump, jump. Kid says, no, no, no. Mother screams, mother yells, mother in pajamas. She runs where?
Back into the building.
Back into the building? Just before she gets back in the building, she needs what to get in the door? Keys. Does she have them with her? She's frantic. She's looking for bricks, stones, anything to smash what?
Windows.
Windows or front door? To get in, the fireman showed up, said, what's the problem? Got my kid in the back. Fireman runs back there. Looks up at the child and tells the child to do what?
Jump.
Kid goes, hey, dude, I didn't jump for my mother, I ain't jumping for you. Fireman goes, I got an idea, and he runs back to his truck, and he grabs a fireman's pole, you know, the pike pole, and does what? Grabs 12 feet up in the air, and he pulls it down, and he puts his foot on it. Child's reunited with the mother. It's a beautiful story, I told you. They go away. What's that fireman have to do now? 6 more guys, more firefighters show up, and there's flames and debris falling everywhere. And these guys need to get onto the building through the fire escape. What's that one guy doing right now? Holding down a fire escape. Is that what they were originally intended to do? So that 6-man crew became 5. And as soon as he takes his foot off, what's he got to do? He's got to go pull and put it down. Otherwise, anybody up there that wants to get down, what does the fireman have to do?
Walk out.
Gingerly walk out and... There's a fire escape out in Chicago. I just want to show you how violent it is every time it slams the ground. These are usually 12 to 14 feet off the ground. They usually have a mechanism on them. That is either placed correctly or not, but it has a mechanism. See? And I know what I'm doing, and somebody's telling me what to do, how to do it wrong, but I found it like, said, dude, stop telling me what to do, I know what I'm doing. So I basically release it, right? And here's how you release it. You push it forward. It drops the ground 2 to 3 feet per second, hits the ground, and stays down. Is it pretty violent? But it means you're going to get down to the ground. See, it's down to the ground and stays down, but it wiggles and shakes, so it's not a pretty thing. That's why by the time you release it, by the time you get down to the pivot, it's already done its whack and its shake. Then you get on the cantilever. We happened to be there, and what showed up while we were there? You know, one of these trucks. Now, watch how close. Now, this has a release arm to hold it perfectly horizontal. Anything that gets out of balance, which they do in all the alleyways in Boston, for example, what do you think tears down a lot of fire escapes? Moving trucks and cement trucks. Now, this is how close he got to that, but look how close he gets to this one, and see if you can notice the chain on it. See the chain, the illegal chain? So, whenever you see a fire escape in your city that has a chain on it, it's illegally, it's out of bounds. has to have a release arm. So let's take a look at what release arms look like. Oh, this is in Waltham. Anybody ever been to the Waltham Fire Academy or the training center? Yeah, we went there to inspect that for them, and we shut it down that day because it started doing this. It had broken treads on the very fire escape that these guys trained on every day. So don't think it's just firefighters, building inspectors. Everybody has basically ignored the bastard child of egress. This is rust. This is up in Chelsea, the Chelsea Homes, up on Chelsea Hills. The Soldiers' Home. We identified these emergencies. 2 years later, they fixed them. It was the government. But there was emergencies 2 years before. But this is just to show you that if the war didn't get you, the fire escape will. So fire escapes, it can save lives or take them. Damage, trucks, smashes. Now, this basically, it's a life safety issue. It should shut down a building. These are some housing buildings that hold, Section 8 housing and such. Anybody recognize the City Hall? No? Okay, he probably doesn't want to put his hand up. No?
Could be any city hall.
Could be any City Hall, but it's, that's the City Hall that had the missing treads. There was broken treads and missing treads on that City Hall. I think it went to the mayor's office. This is that fire escape.
Not a bad idea.
This is the fire escape that we have here, and I took photographs so that we can show you just exactly what happens. First of all, just to make it clear, 98% of all the fire escapes in the United States are bolted connection fire escapes for a reason. They heat up in the summer and do this. They cool down in the winter and do this. The building sways and moves through minor earthquakes, and they do this. As soon as you weld it, and there's plenty of fire escapes out there that are welded, and they only make about 1 to 3% of the entire market is welded fire escapes. They do this. And anybody that has welding skills know that microscopically things start tearing. But fire escapes traditionally are all bolted connection fire escapes for 100 years. That's how they were made. Now, with welded fire escapes, sometimes you'll have somebody coming into your city and welding a fire escape like they did here. Only problem is in 2010, the EPA said you can't weld or bring a torch or put a flame to what? Lead. To lead. All fire escapes in the United States, other than 1978, have lead. So can you weld fire escapes ever again in your city?
No.
But this is what they do. They'll come in and they'll do an emergency repair on the nose. They'll put a clip on the top. They'll put a clip on the bottom. They'll leave the bolts. You guys, after the show, come down and take a look. If you want to know the wrong way to fix a fire escape, I did that for you. And it's right there because I left the rust and I welded it. Now, anybody that knows what rust grows every year, right? A 16th, an 1/8. So the welds stretch or the welds snap? Welds snap. On average, when you repair a tread, if somebody gets away with it, and that weld is going to grow a 16th, an 1/8 over a year or two, can a weld hold it? So it's going to rip. A welded repair today that's signed off by an engineer is going to rip itself in 1 to 3 years. Does everybody agree with that? You're not going to re-inspect this for 5, though. But the law says you can't weld them anymore. But thank God that 98% of every fire escape you're ever going to fix in your city anyway is a bolt anyway. Now, the typical welded repair looks like this. A truck shows up. 100 feet of cable shows up. A guy, not the owner of the business, shows up. A guy jumps on it with or without a fire permit. With or without an extinguisher. On a fireproof building or a wood structure. With leaves on the ground or asphalt, right? And he starts welding. Now, that's how they've been fixing it for 75 years. Same guy now shows up in his truck. Same guy, without the owner, with a permit, drags 100 feet of extension cord, puts his impact gun with a star socket, puts it on the square head bolt, and goes da 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 da, and it goes snap. Takes a pin and pop. removes the first one. The second one he strips with the machine. He grabs his grinder with a little cutting disc and he goes, he goes, pop. He takes the tread off of this side with a hammer. He whacks it. Guess what falls out? All the rust. He wire brushes it. He cleans it. He lifts it. He takes 2 bolts from Home Depot, 3/8 bolts. He goes, tightens them, repeats it on the other side. Done. Takes the extension cord away. No fire permit. No welding on site. Certified repair. Do I need a load test after we rebolt and refurbish the tread? Do I need to load test it? Nope. Will an engineer sign off on that as a certified repair? And then when that thing is nice and tight, he caulks it with 50-year silicone. Question?
Grade 8 hardened steel bolts.
Oh, that's a great question. I love it. Ready?
Stainless steel.
What fails a connection? The bolt or the connection? The rust in the connection. So you can take a tread. I'll take one of these treads and I can pop out one of these bolts, or both the bolts on one side on a connection that has no rust, or even if it has rust. I'll take a hardened piece of wood, a dowel, and I'll slam it in there, and I'll make you walk up and down. And I can find a wood that will take 100 pounds per square foot. Load test. All the bolt does is stopping it from shearing. All the bolt does is it's holding the connection. As long as that connection is tight, you can use standard bolt, grade 5, grade 8. So it's not whether you're going to use a titanium bolt on this. It means nothing. The connection is not, it's getting torn. The bolt is torn. A grade 8 will get torn when the rust grows. It'll tear a standard bolt. It'll tear a grade 8 because nothing can hold ice or water. It's called rust jacking or ice jacking. I don't care what you got, it'll rip it. Okay? A weld needs 60 or 70,000 pounds to rip it, right? You put rust inside of a welded connection, it rips the weld anyway. So, bolts, the standard out there is they use standard grade bolts, and a lot of times it's just grade 5 or a standard bolt that you buy off the shelf. Because the connection, once it's sealed with 50 of silicone, when's the chance of that rust getting in there ever again? Rust needs 2 things, water and air. So, just showing you all the types of connections and all the things that people have done. So, can you weld in your city anymore on a fire escape? Can I change all the bolts?
Yes.
This is what typically happens. You're going to see this, that they weld the nose, but the bolts stay. See all the rust? This is typical. Somebody will fix a fire escape and weld the nose. The reason you never see that is because you guys, since you didn't pull a permit, there's no final walkthrough by you guys. There's also no final walkthrough by the structural engineer, because it's all painted black. Looks good to me. So this is the piece. This is the original. That's the replacement. Again, point to the city near you that you think it belongs to, because it's never from your city. Elementary school was using this fire escape, feeding a playground in the back, recess playground. And the guy that made me change that was not the principal, was the facilities manager that said, dude, get this thing out of here. It's going to hurt or kill somebody. And yet every year, fire inspector did his annual. Every year, the building inspector did his annual. And nobody ever wrote a violation on this. And if I go to that city and go back, there's probably a certificate on it from 5 years ago. But it's an opinion letter. This is in everybody's cities. By the way, this is not about whose city this is. This is in everybody's cities. These things are hiding in the background. It's the bastard child of egress. They're hiding under bridges. They're hiding in the back. You can't see this. You start walking out of here, you're going to start seeing more fire escapes in your city than you've ever seen before, because you didn't want to see them either. Oh, this is Rutgers. I threw this in because we got a lot of crazy fire escapes in. But when I go around the country, this is the only one I've ever seen. A fireman's pole fire escape on a student building.
All right.
I've never seen another one like this. A fireman pole, double, not a single, a double.
His and hers.
It's a his and hers.
Climb up one and come down the other.
My girlfriend would die before she got
Guys, I took this picture from the Bridgeport, right? The Bridgeport fire. This is by far one of the best pictures out of the Bridgeport fire. How old is that kid? Where's the mother? Where's the father? That's an 8-year-old kid. And that ladder's not working. Why is that ladder not coming down?
Too late.
Could be out of balance,
Probably rusted in place.
rusted in place. But 50 people in that building were stuck until the firemen got everybody out, and then they fought the fire, and the apartment was a total loss. Because they were busy in a rescue mission.
But right now, firefighters are taking down the ladders and rolling up the hoses. But earlier in the night, when they pulled up, there were flames coming out of the side of the building. Firefighters say it was one of the scarier moments because when you pull up to a building and you see children and mothers hanging off the side of the fire escape, smoke swirling around them, they said that's scary, scary stuff. They got up there, they got the ladders up, and they said nobody got hurt.
The fire escape, there was 3 or 4 people hanging off the fire escape. They couldn't get off. They were just on the fire escapes. I had people hanging in the fire escapes at the rear of the building, and on this side of the building, we had a bunch of people on that fire escape.
About 50 people were displaced inside this building. However, firefighters say there's good news tonight. It looks like everybody will be allowed to go back in except the one unit where the fire was in. They said that's good luck to them tonight. I'm Bob Wilson, on the scene of Bridgeport, News 8.
Every one of you has got buildings that look like that. Every one of you. This is what they were facing that night. What didn't happen was what happened here in Boston. But this was the scene in Bridgeport. This was the scene. The lady's nervous, the child is nervous, but in Bridgeport, guess who else was nervous? The firemen saying, get me off this stupid thing. Because every now and then, even though they're told don't get on them, at Bridgeport, what did they have to do?
You have to get on.
They have to get on them. You can't yell up at a person and say, hey, my chief says I can't get on it, like jump. Internal connections. This is a 22-story building that was going to be used for housing in Chicago. This is that $200 to $500 investigation. That's what it costs to go and find out what's rusted. A load test will tell you, because when you load test, you know what a pass looks like on a load test? Does anybody know what a fail looks like? It's a pile of rubble on the ground. Now, every now and then, what we suggest in certain cases is let sleeping dogs lie, because even though you got all this rust coming out that's indicating that there's something going on inside, 5 inches away or 10, we put in a duplicate connection and tie back to the original connection, or we do what's called a unification of the supports. If I've got 5 supports, I take a 3x3 angle that's 12 feet long, I got holes in it every 3 feet, and I'm epoxy bolting the entire angle into the building. And then wherever they touch the original connections, what do? I mechanically fasten it back with a bolt. I basically duplicated the connection so I can eliminate the need to verify the internal connections. But I'm at salt now at 200% of what the law requires for the load test. So with new epoxy bolts, new Hilti epoxy bolts into the wall, can now I perform a load test if the rest of the fire escape on the outside has been refurbished? Sure. So the rule is very simple. Spot repair, then you got to load test your fire escape. Fully refurbish your 50 to 75-year-old fire escape, can we avoid the load test? If you've also gone in and verified to the inspector that you've either duplicated the connections or they're 100% verifiable through destructive opening and or duplication or reinforcement. The engineer is going to prove this to you, not the owner and not the vendor. Because water does get in between the veneer and the masonry. Through the parapet wall. It rains for 75 years inside this building without them knowing. There's another building we did in New York. Same thing. And they were fixing other problems besides the fire escape problems. They were fixing sills that were cracked and getting water. A lot of these sills had ACs already in them. And guess what ACs do all year long? Drippy, drippy, drip, and they ate the inside of these fire escapes. But this is very costly to go in and verify every connection. So we're saying, let sleeping dogs lie. It's a lot cheaper. It's $50 versus $500 to deal with a connection, and it's an approved connection. It's either going to get epoxy bolted into a masonry block wall, through bolted into a block wall if it allows on the inside, or on a wood structure, everything's through bolted with a plate on the back. Questions so far?
But
Yes.
the problem with that,
Just not so much a fire escape question, but what have you seen in other parts of the country as far as building officials doing that you find that the fire escape is deficient, shouldn't be used, and now you get secondary means of egress not being there, what do they do with the occupants of the building?
Well, on average, in 50 states, 40 of them are run by fire departments. That's who writes all the violations. In 10, it's the building department that writes the violations. They have a choice. They either put a fire watch, they vacate the building, but I got a great answer for you that I give to all of them. Any fire escape that's out of whack, can I call Joe Scaffolding from that city and put in a full set of scaffolding with stairs all the way up and tie it into a piece of the fire escape that is sound while they're repairing this fire escape that's out of, totally out of commission for whatever reason? Scaffolding is your answer. You can scaffold any building and put up a temporary means of egress for $1,000, $2,000 a month while they're dragging you through court, while they're making all kinds of noise so that you don't have to vacate the building, because every now and then children, old people, you've got some situation that this building can't be vacated, and the fire escape has got $5,000 or $50,000 worth of problems, and they're under foreclosure, they have no money, whatever the sob story is going to be, scaffolding. And even if the city has to order the scaffolding and charge it to them, tie it in, scaffolding is the answer. And they have scaffolding that will meet the 7-Eleven rule. Okay?
Excuse me.
Good. Yes?
Seems to be the problem with epoxying into the brickwork is that most of the brickwork, like in the city of Boston, needs all to be pointed, and the bricks are just setting in there. There's no strength in
Again, then you go to a through bolt. You have to go to a through bolt. Where the engineer and you are going to, if you're concerned about the strength of a wall, your engineer is going to do additional testing for you to say, you're right, the inside masonry wall is crap, it's all porous and falling apart, we're going to make them through bolt this, and I don't care what damage they do on the inside, we got to put a plate in here, and we got to bury it or we're going to expose it. We tell the client the epoxy on this building is not going to work, but on many buildings it will work because there's a hole inspection to say that it will, for example, in Seattle, you can't put an epoxy bolt in the hole until you call the hole inspector to come and verify that the hole is ready for the epoxy. So that is just, it's an answer, but if the epoxy is a problem on your old building, then the through bolt is always the answer for every structure that's ever gone up. You can't lack screw a fire escape into a building. You can only through bolt it, or epoxy bolt it, or cement it into the pocket.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems in Boston because the facades are falling off the building. So
Yeah.
they're star bolting and through bolting to hold the walls in.
Yeah, we would just sandwich it in. Well, here's an example of what we have to do. This is in California. So the verification process is also grabbing a drill, and you start drilling next to the steel, and you open it up, and this is another way for us to just basically throw in a camera and start verifying that the steel is all good all the way down. Very destructive, very costly, and you got to do it to every connection. There it is. That's a 3/4 hammer drill. I sometimes have to drill twice in order to get a good enough hole for me to get a good enough view. If I take that same hole and I go 5 inches out and I epoxy bolt it into the building, then I mechanically fasten back with an angle clip, why do I have to expose what I think is already a good connection? It's got no tears, no rust coming out, but I have to verify it as an engineer. So what do? You do an epoxy bolt. So it only makes up about 3% of the whole fire escape to basically verify the tie back into the building, which nobody does on these opinion letters that you guys are getting. Nobody does. But this is a 75-year-old building. They have to now. Otherwise, load test it. The load test will tell you if it's a bad connection, right? But if there is a bad connection back there, what do we have on the ground after the load test? Scrap.
We used to have an engineer in Boston that used to load test them by jumping up and down and saying, oh yeah, that's a...
Well, we use Tom for doing that. Tom's one of our load testers, and
guy weighed about 95
he's
pounds.
retired. Yeah, he's retired now. We said, Tom, you can't do that anymore.
How many fails?
How do you load test it? It's a great question. Look, a 3x5 platform, or even take a 2x10-foot platform. That's 20 square feet, 100 pounds per square foot. That's 2,000 pounds. I got to bring sand, water, plates, not people. Put them up there. Under an engineer's oversight, engineer's letter, we'll give you a copy of a typical load test, but this is how simple it is. Then you got to take measurements. You got to load it with 40% of the weight first. Take measurements. Can't deflect more than 3/16 of an inch. Videotape, photograph, and then put the remaining 60% for the remaining 20 minutes. Take measurements again, see if there's any deflection. If it passes, repeat that on all the other platforms. Now, like you're on a tree limb. What side do you saw on the tree limb? From the tree side, from the thing? Because as you put these weights down, you are part of the load test. So how often do people want to load test without having some other mechanism to be on while you're load testing the fire escape? So that's why load test is not a very thing. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've only done one load test, and that was in California. And not because a city official said load test it. The owner on a 10-story building wanted to load test it. But he said, but it's very expensive, and he goes, I want to load test this, but it's going to cost you crazy money. He goes, I want to give money to you. And I'm like, okay, I will take your money. Even though we fully refurbished it, and this is what it looks like. This is all the inside. This building was masonry. It was through bolted. There was a couple of them that had, some exposed, but we verified everything. We said, dude, you don't need to load test. So the law doesn't require you to load test it after we verify that it's been structurally refurbished. I want to load test. I have extra money in my left pocket. I want to give to somebody. And he gave it to us. So this is what the load test looks like. And we use the cable through the center of everything, and we basically load tested 3,000 something pounds on every one of these. And there's our, you use that.
Strain meter?
I forget there's a name for it, but now I'm caught here with a brain hemorrhage here. But basically, as you pull on the cable. And what do we use? We needed 3,000 to 5,000 pounds on the ground. We just used a truck. So we lifted the tail end of this truck, and we repeated it every fire escape. And then you have to back up every fire escape against another fire escape in case somebody wants to give. The other fire escapes hold the pieces. It's a long process. It takes all day, and speaking with the engineers. Now let's talk about fire escapes out there that are missing pieces. Some fire escapes are missing their rails, some fire escapes are missing their guardrails, some fire escapes are missing treads. Here's another case. There's a firefighter that we were an expert witness on. He went to this floor to get a woman and a child out. He fell through 3 treads over here. Hit the floor below, went back up, got her, got off out of the building, saved her and the child. He was 27 years old. When he hit the ground, when he was finally all done, the adrenaline wore off. He had basically done something to his spine. He's no longer a fireman. He sued the owner, even though he had, he was on disability and all that. He sued the owner for negligence. Not as an accident, because when they did the investigation, the metallurgists, the inspections that we've done, basically proved that this fire escape hadn't seen a repair in over 25 years. And the law says you must maintain it at all times. So it showed that the owner, who owned the building for that period of time, never ever fixed the fire escape. We got back there 2 years after to do an investigation, and when we got there, this is what we found. Broken treads, missing treads, and when I got there, my foot fell through. So now let's talk about how fire escapes were made 100 years ago and how fire escapes are made today. Please open to your book here. And we're going to start talking about just all the components of a fire escape, okay? And as soon as I get through what a typical tread, how I make a typical tread, then we're going to go into all the pieces of a fire escape, so you'll know how every fire escape in the United States is ever built. They haven't changed in 100 years. It was so good when they built it the first time, nobody's ever innovated a different way to do it. Okay? So, tread. Every tread, 100 years ago and today, comes in a 20-foot length. You cut it all into little pieces, and you put the 2 pieces together. You have 2 options. You can drill it and bolt it, drill it and rivet it, or today, everybody puts it together and welds it. For treads, do they paint or prime the 2 pieces of naked metal before they weld it together? No. Back then, they didn't have welding, they just bolted it together. Do you think they primed the area before they joined them? No. So they put the 2 pieces of metal together, they put a rivet in there, and basically, and then they tie it into a clip, and the clip gets tied to a stringer. So when this fire escape goes up, they usually put it up primed, and then they start painting it. Now, what all rust needs in order to grow is air and water. That's why you have a paint. It's a sealant. As long as it's sealed, will that connection ever grow? No. So, in the summer, a tread on a connection does what? When it heats up?
Expands.
And then in the winter when it cools, what's it do? Now, the paint that's holding it, what's it do? Cracks. Letting in what? Water and air. The 2 things rust needs to grow. We call this rusty gold for a reason, guys. All right, so it starts to grow over here within the first 5 years. You're supposed to maintain your fire escape and paint them every 3 years. Spot paint them every 3 years, fully paint them every 5 to 7. In the 1900s, how many people were doing that religiously till today? Zero, thank you very much. With that, what you get is into the second part. They just kept painting over the rust. They never cleaned the rust, they just cleaned it, because it was the beginning surface rust. It's very minor, it's right at the top. You can usually brush that away and repaint. Did they do that? As soon as you paint over rust, what's the first thing to give away 1 month later? The paint on that rusty area. Not the other stuff, but on that rusty area. But then it starts growing and it gets into the connection, and it's got a 1/16, and it's got this rivet that's, they put in that's only about a 1/2 inch, 3/8 to 1/2 inch long. And it wants to come down. It's going through about that much. And it's a rivet. So even though I got a 1/16, an 1/8, or 1/4 inch inside my connection, but I got a pin there, can my tread fall? Nope. Because I got a pin there. See, even though I got a little rust growing, that pin, which is still solid, won't let the clip drop. That was 25 and 50 years ago. You can stop on a rusty fire escape with rust in its connections, and you're not going anywhere. But now let's go to today. That pin now has grown to a 1/4, 3/8, and it did this to the outside of the pin or the bolt. And you got some examples here of connections where the bolt is gone, the head's still there on both sides. But once it's out on the outside and you step on that tread, what happens? You fall through. The tenants fall through. So 75 years later, not 25 years ago, 25 years ago, not many people were falling through fire escapes yet. But the 75-year-old fire escapes you're looking at today, the pin has moved to this point where it's basically a hand grenade. You step on this landmine, and what happens? So when we walked back there to go do the inspection on this fire escape, we found this much rust sitting in all the tread connections, even though the fireman got hurt 2 years ago. We found treads falling as we were walking on them. Now we have a fire escape full of lawyers, and we're falling through the treads already that hurt the fireman 2 years before. His lawyers and the lawyers for the fireman. And basically the fire escape treads that the guy fell through were perfect. They were rebolted. Everything else was left the way it was. So they settled the case right after this, because it proved the guy was not only negligent before the fireman, the guy was negligent now, because imagine you dropped a lawyer during that investigation.
How many lawyers?
That was a great
Not
lawyer.
enough.
Great lawyer joke, you know, busload of lawyers going off a cliff. What's worse than that?
It was an empty seat.
It was an empty seat.